Okay, hello everybody. I hope that you all can hear me. I think this should be working. So I will wait a few minutes and see who will be joining. But today we'll be talking about La Belle et la Bête, The Beauty and the Beast by Madame de Villeneuve, who was an 18th century fairy tale writer. And her version of The Beauty and the Beast is considered the oldest written version. I'm sure that there are other versions that are older, but hers is like the first published edition. And the first thing that jumped out at me reading this fairy tale is how long this book actually is. Hello. Iwilitu. So how I don't know how to pronounce it. So I'm talking about La Belle et la Bête, the original Beauty and the Beast, and how long it is as a story. Hello, Feliday. Most fairy tales are quite short. So Madame de Villeneuve was influenced by Charles Perrault, who has given us versions of Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella and Bluebeard, and so just a lot of really famous fairy tales. And his fairy tales are in verse, and they are fairly short. This novel is actually a novel. It's over 100 pages. I would say it's about 150 pages. I read it on my Kindle, so I can't really tell. But it is a pretty long book for a fairy tale. And so, and yet it is very clear that it's a fairy tale. It has all of the elements of a fairy tale, including fairies. The whole last section of the novel is dedicated to the fairy world and all of the infighting between fairies and fairies behaving badly and generous fairies. Fairies are a huge part of this story. Fairies aren't always in fairy tales, but this one, they're definitely fairies. Now, Madame de Villeneuve, like I said, was an 18th century female author at a time when being a woman and an author was really challenging. Often women... Oh, yeah, right. Okay, that's a good comment. Yes, it was so long. I started to read this morning in preparation, and I didn't expect it to be this big. Right. I've been spending all day reading it, and actually, I started it a few days ago. It's a good thing I started it a few days ago because, yeah, I didn't expect it to be so long. So it does challenge what we think of as a fairy tale, but it really is. The two major... So at this time, being a woman and an author was challenging. Oftentimes, women would write anonymously. Now, I don't know whether Villeneuve published under her own name or whether she published anonymously. It was quite normal for women to publish anonymously. Her other fairy tale influence, so Perrault is one. The other one is Madame d'Aulnoy. And I will actually write both of their names in here. There you go, Charles Perrault and Madame d'Aulnoy. I feel like this is the kind of setup that I have when I'm teaching, so I'm using the chat feature for that. But use the chat feature to interject, tell me how your thoughts about the work. This is not formal at all, don't worry. But yeah, so Charles Perrault and Madame d'Aulnoy are the two major influences. And in fact, Madame d'Aulnoy is who gave us the term fairy tales, contes de fées. So the tale of fairies, fairy tales. And this story does a lot of things at the same time. So the first part of the story is the one that you know, more or less. There are some differences, but the first part of the story is kind of similar to the Disney film. Again, not exactly. We'll get into that. Then we have the transformation, all of that happens, and then you have the second part of the story, which deals with a new issue, which is social class. And particularly the social class of Belle. What class does she belong to? She seems to be a peasant, and she's the daughter of a merchant. And so a daughter of a merchant is not worthy to marry a prince. So we have this second part of the story where we're like, okay, there's a class issue here. The queen doesn't want her son to marry the daughter of a merchant. At the end of the second part, we learn that actually our Belle is not the daughter of a merchant. She's actually the daughter of a fairy and the king of this other land called, what is it called? It's the Île Heureuse, the Happy Island. And so that leads us to the third part of the story, which is all about the fairies and the drama of the fairies that explains, essentially justifies Belle's family history, that she actually does come from a noble family and that she is worthy of the prince. So there are actually 3 different sections, and the Beauty and the Beast story, again, is really the one that we know is really in the first section. Okay. There are a lot of things going on here. I have a whole long list of topics that we could talk about. But a quick summary off the top of my head, because I didn't really write it out. I struggled to find a free version online, but I managed to find on Google Books a version written in French from the 18th century. That's what I used. I found an edition on Amazon. I'm not sure about, I know that it was kind of difficult. So it had the old ending of the imparfait and the long S that looked like an F. Oh, so you read it in the original type. Okay, there is, so the one that I used, let me see if I can pull it up. The French version, and then the English version you might be able to find. But the one that I used, this is on Amazon, so you can decide if you want it, but this is the version that I consulted. This is it. This one, oh my, did I want to show that? Okay, maybe I didn't want to show that. That is weird. Let's hide this. This is, but anyway, it's in the, there you go. It's in the chat. You can just copy and paste it. That is the version that I use. So basically, it's like edited for modern spelling. But you read it in the original French, which is great. It's always good practice to do that. And then I think there are English versions on Amazon as well. But yeah, for Google Books, you'd probably have to use an original. So that's great. It's great. So yes, let's talk about the story. So the story begins with this merchant who used to be very wealthy, and he has 6 daughters and 6 sons. His wife has passed away. He's living in a lot of, wealth and luxury, and his daughters are very vain. They like, wearing all the jewels. Oh, the link doesn't work. Oh, okay, so yeah, if you're in France, that's fair. I wonder, so if does Amazon.fr have it? Let's see. Oh, and you know what? Is Kindle a thing in France? Might not be. They have some versions. They have some, yeah, they have print versions, but it doesn't seem like, well, I don't know. I'll show you this, and you can decide if it's something that you can access. I think this is the one on the French Amazon website. I don't know. It might help. But yeah, it's too bad. There are a few modern editions. Okay. So yes, is a thing. Okay, so that should work then. So the story goes, this merchant, he has all this wealth, and suddenly he loses his wealth. And because he loses his wealth, they have to leave the city and live in the country. And all of the sisters are distraught. The men have to work, like they have to actually do their own work. They can't hire servants anymore, which is really shocking. Because later the father will have slaves. So anyway, so he has all his wealth, he loses all his wealth. All the daughters are distraught, except the youngest daughter, Belle, who is the perfect girl. She's just perfect. She's very strong. She's able to see through. Like she's not tied to wealth. She's content wherever she is. She's content if she's living in the city. She's content now that she's living in the country. But the father is really distraught. And one day he finds himself in a forest and he ends up in the palace of the beast. And he's plucking a rose when the beast finds him, surprises him. And the beast says, and so the man wants to save, he wants to save himself. And the beast basically tells him that he can save himself if he can convince, well, not so much convince, but get his daughter to come to the palace freely. So it has to be free, and to remain with the beast. And so the father is horrified. He takes the rose and he brings it back. And his daughter, the youngest daughter, Belle, is convinced that, well, she basically decides, I'm going to go and remain with the beast. She accepts this. She freely accepts this. She's not being coerced into doing this. And this is really important. The beast makes it clear that if she is coerced, then this won't work. So she has to freely decide to remain with the beast, which she does. So she arrives with her father, and she remains with the beast. And the father is then given some like jewels and clothing that he can then take with him back home and give to his children. But what we come to learn is that along the way, his horses were spooked. They ran away with the treasure. And then somehow mysteriously the treasures ended up back in the father's house anyway, which then was seen by the father as a sign that the beast was actually caring for his daughter. But Belle stays at the palace, and the palace is like phenomenal. It's just like the magical palace that we see in the Disney movie, except instead of magical cup and saucer and clock, we have monkeys and parrots, particularly, that are her servants. They're her pages. And she gets all the food she wants, and generally the beast leaves her alone. Except, like, every day he comes to her and asks to sleep with her. Like, would you like to sleep with me? And Belle is like, no. So that's very awkward. The first time that happens in the book, I'm like, okay, wow. So she's but so she says no, and he leaves her alone. He totally respects her no. But she starts to worry that eventually he's going to force himself upon her, or that there will be some kind of punishment for her saying no to him. But what she does most of the time is she visits all of the rooms in this palace. This is a huge palace, and the rooms are, like I said, magical. So they have some kind of mirrors in these rooms that allow her to actually participate or watch operas and to watch plays and, I don't know, attend concerts and also see what's going on in the world. So she gets this very privileged perspective on the world through essentially her wardrobe. I wonder whether, you know, C.S. Lewis knew about the story, because she talks about the garde-robe, essentially wardrobe, is like where she is witnessing all of these things. And then, so there's that spectacle. Then there's her dreams. So she's constantly having dreams of this really nice-looking man alongside the beast. And in her mind, there are two separate individuals. And there seems to be a conflict between them. And then there's also this woman in her dreams, which I'm assuming is the fairy that we come to learn about later, who is trying to tell her to make right decisions. Was it coucher in the sense of lie with or sleep? Well, I think it is lie with. It must be lie with, because when she does actually agree to sleep with him, he just sleeps next to her. Like, he just starts snoring. So I think it is just lie with. Though they do agree to marry each other when they eventually do. I think that there is supposed to be a double sense of that word. Because later, when she returns to her father, she takes leave from the beast and goes back to her father. Her father convinces her to marry the beast and says, "Oh, you should say yes to him, but make sure that it's eternal. Like, make sure that you guys essentially exchange vows." But yeah, it does seem. I don't know. It's messy, because I think it literally in the text it's just sleep with in the same bed. But I think the idea is that it's supposed to become a marriage. I don't know if others had a different impression. And maybe it's, you know, the whole like plucking of the rose. I think it's subtle. I don't think that it would ever come out and, you know, say this. Oh, thank you, Salma. Thank you for joining. I love the way you share the story. That's nice. I'm trying to, off the top of my head, tell the story because I didn't really take a lot of notes on that part. Okay, so what happens? Belle doesn't want to spend the night. Doesn't want to spend the night with the beast. And she's starting to get really annoyed because there's this really sexy man in her dreams, and she doesn't want to be with the beast. So she decides to take leave, which the beast allows. She's allowed 2 months to go back to her father and her siblings, but she has to return within 2 months. Otherwise, the beast says that he will die. Now, as I was saying, in the dreams, there are these two figures. There's the really nice-looking man, and then there's the beast. And then there's this other woman who's probably the fairy, whom we will come to know later. Nothing is told to Belle directly, because, as again we will come to see, this is part of the terms of the spell, that no one can come out and tell her. Yes, and also they don't use the word mariage, but imen to mean mariage. That's right. Yeah, imen, which is like the early modern term that is usually used for marriage. Yeah, good point. So yeah, nobody can come out straightforward and say, look, here's what's going on. We have this prince who has been transformed into a beast, and so you have to fall in love with him. Well, none of this can be said. So instead, Belle has to interpret images. And I think that this is a huge theme in the story, is spectacle and image. You have the spectacle of the beast, who is often referred to as a monster. So the word monster comes from the Latin word monstrare. It's a verb which means to show. The monster in medieval and early modern texts is an omen, is a sign. He shows something, okay? So he's, you know, when you think of a monster, we think of someone that's really, really ugly. And often the monster is ugly. But the ugliness is not just revolting, the ugliness reveals something, reveals some truth. Oh, the fairy confirms that it was her in Belle's dream. Oh, okay. So I must have missed that part. I'm thinking it must be the fairy, but yeah, good point. So it is the fairy. So yeah, so she has to interpret this, and then of course you have the monster who is assigned. So we have two different terms that are used for the beast. We have the beast, which in French also has the sense of being an animal, and in fact, when he's transformed, he's on his 4 legs, you know. So he is an animal. I know that the whole time I'm reading about the beast, I'm thinking of the Disney version where he's like walking on 2 legs. But it doesn't seem. It seems like he's an actual beast here. He's an actual animal. But also he's also referred to as a monster. So there's that spectacle. Then there's of course the spectacle of the actual shows that she watches. And then there are her dreams, which she has to interpret. And there's also the spectacle of wealth, the palace itself, and how appealing it is. The daughters who are drawn in by wealth, promises of wealth. So there's the external appearance. And what we come to see is that the monster is this liminal figure. Okay, our beast is a liminal figure. What liminal means is essentially between 2 things. And what is he between 2? He's between 2 things. He's between an animal, and he's actually between human. And how we come to see that is in his eloquence. And his eloquence has to be veiled because one of the terms of the agreement is that he can't come out and speak as a prince. He must constantly hide that aspect of himself and speak like a beast. But because he is very generous towards Belle, she interprets that as humanity. She really sees that as humanity, and particularly like a very high level of humanity. So that when she returns to her father is like, look, yes, he looks like a monster, he looks like a beast, but he actually behaves like a human. So you should marry him. You know, there are so many Bête, and he uses the word Bête here to mean like stupid, fools. There are so many fools who look nice on the outside, but are actually monsters on the inside. So she then decides she is actually going to marry him, which she does. I mean, she doesn't technically do so. The beast just ends up sleeping next to her. And then in the morning, she discovers that he is a very handsome man, the same handsome man that she used to encounter in her dreams. But then she can't wake him up. So he's just sleeping, and she can't wake him up. We have to rewind. When she finally returns after 2 months, she's a little bit late, and so the beast is almost dying. And she's somehow able to wake him up and save him from near death. And that's when there begins to be some kind of recognition that the beast loves her. And there starts to be a connection there. And then, of course, that's sealed with her decision, her free decision to be with him. So yeah, morning, he's a man. He's not moving. He's just constantly, remaining as a man. She's in love with him and then kisses him in his sleep, which, okay. There's a lot of that going on. And then suddenly we, enter the fairy. So suddenly the fairy enters the scene. We have a fairy accompanied by another woman who we come to learn is the prince's mother. And as soon as the 2 women arrive, the beast wakes up, or the really sexy man wakes up, the prince wakes up, and everything is revealed. And the queen then asks, who is Belle? And Belle reveals that she's the daughter of a merchant. And the queen goes, no, my son is not going to marry a peasant. Like, my son is of royal blood. You can't have this. And so the queen tries to convince the fairy to change the, to convince Belle to go with another man. So the queen says, I appreciate, Belle, what you've done for my son, but I can't have you marrying my son because you're of a lower social class. Therefore, I'll give you a different man, and that should be fine. Her tears save him, he says. Oh, you mean like from dying when he's in beast form? Yes, because she's so upset, she feels guilty. Exactly. That's good. You know the story really well. Good. Yes, so she feels very guilty, and that's what helps save him. So they so the queen tries to change things, and that's when the fairy starts to reveal that no, in fact, Belle may appear to be the daughter of a merchant, but actually she's of royal parentage. Her father is the king of this island called l'Île Heureuse, the Happy Island, and her mother is a fairy. So there you go. And her mother, who is the fairy, is the sister of is the sister of the fairy. Vos précieuses larmes, plus efficaces que tous les cordiaux des génies déguisés, reteindre mon homme prêt à sortir. So it says that her precious tears were more efficacious than any other, basically anything else, prevented his soul from leaving his body. Yes. There you go. Good. That's great. And so then, so that's the end of the second part. And the third part, I'm not going to, well, we could go into. The third part is all about what happened. So what happened is that we start with our prince. Our prince was being raised by a fairy. The fairy then fell in love with him. He refused to marry her. She transforms him into a beast. Then she goes back to fairyland, and there is then you have the Île Heureuse, which I keep forgetting, this happy island, with the fairy who falls in love with the king. And what we come to learn is that social hierarchies are just as important in fairyland as they are in the human world. And so the fairy is condemned for being in love with a king, human. So then she's imprisoned, and then she is condemned. And I guess I have to ask you now, you Willie too. Is la mère des temps, the mother of times, the same as the old fairy? Because so the bad fairy here is an old, decrepit fairy who has a lot of authority because she's old, but also because she is super old, the prince doesn't want to marry her because she's ugly, which I find ironic, because that's exactly what Belle. This is the reason why nobody wants to marry the beast, because he's ugly. But basically, the fairy who marries the king in this island is condemned. She's imprisoned, and her daughter is then condemned to having to marry a beast, which is the beast that's like the prince who had been transformed into a monster. Okay. And then there's a lot. I mean, almost after this, like, I feel like the third part, there's like 10 different things that are happening. Every time I think, okay, well, that's the end, there's something new, some other drama brought about by our really ugly fairy. and our really ugly old fairy. Yeah, I don't think they're the same either, because I see them being used separately. I think that La Mère des Temps, the Mother of Times, is on the side of the old fairy, and she's the one who condemns Belle, who is the daughter of the fairy and the king, to marrying a beast. But the old fairy is the one that brings about all of this. She's the one who then tries to kill. The old fairy tries to kill Belle, and then while she basically hires two people to kill Belle, and our nice fairy, who is the sister of the queen fairy. Yeah, no, the ugly fairy remains an ugly fairy. She's just always the ugly fairy. It's so messy. Third part is a mess. The third part is a mess. But basically, our nice fairy saves the day. Our nice fairy saves Belle, and then so what happens is she saves Belle, and she goes into this house where there is a wet nurse who's caring for a baby who's about to die. Then the baby dies. Then she replaces the baby with Belle, and then Belle is then given to the merchant, who then raises her as his own daughter, not knowing that this is actually the daughter of some other family. And yeah, and the way that the nice fairy saves Belle from the evil fairy, or the evil fairy's servants who are about to kill her, is by transforming into a bear. So it's in the form of a bear that she does so. She's on the side of the old fairy at the beginning, then she takes the side of Belle's real mother. I assumed that it was more of deference and like recognizing the laws of fairyland, which our fairy still does. She does recognize the laws and the hierarchy, but she does side with Belle's real mother, I think, because Belle's real mother is her sister, so it becomes more complicated. But she also has to, kind of constantly negotiate that. So she's negotiating these things in the way that women in the earthly world have to negotiate. They have to negotiate love and social class. The queen has to do the same. In the earthly queen, the mother of the prince, she recognizes the generosity of Belle towards her son, but also, she has to make sure that her son marries someone of royal blood. So there's this constant negotiation that's happening on Earth that's reflected in fairyland. But she does talk about that. She talks about how complicated it is. And it seems as if the fairies have different stages. So as they get older, I think if they transform into a serpent, then they have more authority. It seems to be like a reference to some other like medieval stories where fairies transform into serpents or a part serpent, like Melusine. So there's a lot of, again, these liminal spaces between worlds, constant negotiation between values. Belle herself, she begins as extremely virtuous, as someone who's always avoiding wealth and trying to see beyond appearance. But when she's in the palace, she's actually quite drawn to spectacle and to comfort. And, she wants to spend all of her time playing with the monkeys, who are her pages, and the parrots. And so she does seem to be a more complicated figure, which I appreciated. The fairy part, I think, is the most interesting, because it is so different. Although, isn't there like a YA book that has been? There's that one book that I see all over BookTube. Now, I don't know the story, but what is it? A Court of Thorns and Roses? Yeah, the snake thing is confusing. I think it's a reference to Melusine, which is a medieval story about a woman who's part serpent. Yeah, Melusine. That's exactly what I think of. But yeah, there's A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, which is evidently like this extremely pornographic, extremely pornographic, but it's like an erotica kind of retelling of Beauty and the Beast. But evidently there are a lot of fairies in it, so I think that maybe she has been inspired by the original Beauty and the Beast, because there are quite a lot of fairies. And, our old decrepit fairy is she's into the men, you know. She's constantly trying to win their favor, because our old decrepit fairy also goes after the king of this happy island, and she takes the form of another woman. Let's see. There's this constant negotiation. What is spectacle? You know, whatever you see, should you believe it? Should you not believe it? There's deception that works for the good of characters. So, like our nice fairy, she uses deception to save characters. And then, of course, you have deception that harms. So, like our evil fairy, who uses deception to destroy. What else do we have? Social class, I think that's the part that is something that would really be important for women and for female readers of the story. The real struggles that women in the society have, the real questions that women have to deal with, where social class really does matter, but also love. And this happy island that I spoke of is an alternative to this earthly world, because in the happy island, people can marry whoever they love, unless anybody, unless someone objects. That is the only thing that matters in the happy island, which is the reason why the king falls in love and marries what he thinks is a peasant, a shepherdess. So he marries. So his fairy wife is actually disguises herself as a shepherdess, and she has these sheep that are actually not sheep, because they're never attacked by wolves. So they're just fake sheep. They're like appear to be sheep, and yet the king falls in love with her and marries her. And so in his world, that's totally fine. It's in the fairy world that it's not okay that a fairy would marry a human. So this happy island is like this alternative reality that Madame de Villeneuve, that is different from Madame de Villeneuve's world, especially because her name suggests that she comes from an aristocratic family, and actually she did. She came from a very prominent Protestant family in France, and so she would have limited options. Social family, these social class really means a lot. Let's see. Anything? Oh yeah, this whole virtue and eloquence is interesting. There's the monster who betrays his true nature, like the fact that he's an actual human, because of the way he speaks and his show of generosity. So, and like virtue is what distinguishes the human from the beast. And so also, who is the beast? The beast is the person, is the one who is not virtuous. So maybe some of the sisters' suitors or some of the other, bad men would be beasts, whereas our beast here is like he's a real prince. Despite everything, as he tries to conceal, right? He has to conceal his true nature. But despite that, his humanity comes through. And so that I guess in the end, it's more than okay to marry an Anne. It's a very strange story, but also I just love how layered this work is. I think that it's definitely my favorite. I found it very atmospheric, perfect for this time of year, and also raises some very serious questions in a really fun way. So I really love this. I have spoken a lot, and I want to see if, anybody else has things to say about it. I think in this last part, I will just kind of mention the Disney version, because that's the one that most people know. You know that there are other versions after Villeneuve's. But let's see. So I haven't seen the most recent version, which came out, I think, in 2017. But I have seen the original, and I've seen a few of these live action Disney versions. They seem to be like almost literal reproductions of the animated film. So I'm going to assume the storyline is fairly similar. But the plot is a bit different. So I'm like quickly looking at the Wikipedia article to try to remind myself. There is a rose. The rose is always kind of associated with the story, but the plot of the Disney movie, there is this old beggar woman who's an enchantress. So I'm guessing this is supposed to be our evil fairy, and she tries to give a rose to a prince for shelter, and so then he refuses, and then she punishes him. And then she casts a spell on the rose, which then transforms the entire castle into this enchanted castle. He becomes a beast, and he has to convince someone to love him before the last petal falls. Yeah, so this is a little bit different, though. There is some similarity between them. I thought it dragged on sometimes. Yeah. Yeah, I guess, I mean, you know, for a fairy tale, it is long. I did feel like it was a little bit long, though I did find it I guess because in the third part, it was so complicated that I had to pay attention, because I was like, okay, so we have this character who is at war with, okay, what's going on? How many fairies do we have? We have so many fairies. I need to keep them all straight. So, and also my Kindle version, it looked like it was longer than it actually was. So it was long for a fairy tale, but I didn't find it overly long. I think if you go into it as a novel or a novella, I think that's for the best. But if you do go into it like if you were reading a regular fairy tale, then yes, there's also a lot of backstory, because a lot of this book is the backstory. The first third is where all the fun magical stuff happens, and then the last two, there is magic, but it's all in the past. It's all like storytelling, like this is what happened. So it's a great reveal, lots of exposition. Let's see. Yeah, and then the whole character of Gaston is not actually a thing. So Belle doesn't have the suitor who's crazy. Yeah, because in the movie, Gaston stabs Beast with a knife. Yeah, we don't have that. So anyway, it is different. I'm not surprised. Disney. So I have not read Beaumont's stories. It seems like you know more about this. It is also sad how Villeneuve's... I'll just put this up. Haha, there we go. It is also sad how Villeneuve's version was forgotten in favor of Marie Le Prince de Beaumont's version, where she basically takes Villeneuve's story but removed the third part about the fairies. Oh, so I haven't read this version. Beaumont's story might be then the most influential on these modern adaptations. But yes, why are we taking away the fairies? Isn't that what a fairy tale should be about? Fairies? 60-page story. Yeah, I think I expected that. Keep all the fairies straight. Oh my gosh, all the fairies. There are so many fairies. Especially because I feel like at the very, very end, we get the king's sister, like the king of the island's sister, who, like, for the most part, we don't get in the rest of the book, but suddenly she appears too. A lot of women. I do have to say the women are really badass, okay? Like, the prince's mother conquered lands, defended lands, protected her husband's lands. That's an amazing part. I wrote wow in the margins. See if I can find where I wrote that. Yes, it says she took entire provinces, won battles, reduced the defeated to a shameful peace, which he was only able to obtain through very harsh conditions. So that's what the queen did. That's how she defended her lands against an enemy. And that's also why she gave her son to this fairy for safekeeping, who turned out to be wicked. But I just was like, wow, this woman is incredibly powerful. So I would love to see an adaptation of this. Let's see. It's interesting to think about the fairy world as a mirror, as a reflection of the earthly world, but also how it's different from the earthly world. I mean, the fairies seem to live a long time because they have different ages. And they have a beast. There's a beast element, right? Because if they have a serpent period. So if they have a serpent period, that means they are part beast. So, yep, I enjoyed this quite a bit, and I thought it was a good one to read. I do want to read now the later versions. I don't think I'm going to read all of like the very modern adaptations. Doesn't seem to me to be my thing. But I do want to read Beaumont's because, yes, it'll be really interesting to compare. So, anything else? I feel like we got through a lot. Are there other themes that jumped out at you? Let's see. La Mère des Temps, the chief fairy, ugly mean fairy, then the shepherdess queen fairy, and finally okay, so that's right. So these are all the fairies. We have La Mère des Temps, which is the chief fairy. Yeah, she's the one who curses Belle to having to marry this beast. Ugly mean fairy is the one who like causes all of this to happen. I mean, she's the one who tries to do away with Belle. She's the one who transforms the prince into a beast. Shepherdess queen fairy, who is the sister of the nice fairy, right? And finally her sister, the kind fairy, who helped Belle and the prince. That's right. Those are all the fairies. Unless there's another fairy we're missing, but I think those are the major fairies that are involved. I would have liked to see if they had names. I mean, do the fairies have names? I wanted to see. So anyway, so there's that. That was really fun. I really enjoyed it. I loved all of your interventions. It was great. I'm constantly trying to think about how to talk about this stuff. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. So in October, we're going to be reading The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. The last time I read The Three Musketeers, I was in middle school, and it wasn't during school. I read it on my own, so a lot of it just went over my head. But I thought we could do something fun. Now, this is a huge book. I mean, this was a bit long for a fairy tale, but I mean, this is a historical fiction, right? And it's huge. Okay. So as a result, I'm not going to do a weekly. They're going to be 2 live streams. One is going to be on October 11th. Did I say 11th? I think I said October 11th would be the first one. And so that will be, let me pull up I want to make sure I get this right. Let's see. Okay. Yes. So yeah. So the first half will be on October 11th. And then the second half will be on November 1st. And it'll be at 4 p.m. Eastern time, just like today. Let me, okay. Yeah, so chapters 1 through 40 will be on October 11th at 4 p.m. And then chapters 41 through the end will be November 1st at 4 p.m. So I made an entire video about it. If you're interested, I would love for you to join. And if you can't keep up or if it's too long or whatever, you want to come back later, that's totally fine. But yes, this was a lot of fun. Thank you for all of your, anybody who was watching, all your comments, everything. I hope you guys have a wonderful day or evening or whatever, wherever you are in the world. Bye.